Greetings, comrades! I think many of you are familiar with these characters. Gena the Crocodile and Cheburashka, Uncle Fedor and Matroskin the Cat. They have become symbols of Soviet animation that many consider to be the best in the world. And here's the author of all of these characters, Eduard Nikolaevich Uspensky, a children's writer, screenwriter and playwright. He was one of the most famous and respected Soviet children's authors. But when in 2020 the Russian State Children's Library announced a competition for a logo for the Eduard Uspensky Grand Tail Prize, his daughter Tatiana appealed not to give the new literary prize the name of her father, saying that he did not deserve the honor. Why does the famous writer's daughter hate her own father so much? Perhaps it's because when she was 11 he turned her over to his close friend and pseudoscientist Viktor Stalbun. She had to spend 3 years in his group, where she was basically a slave until she escaped. And today I will tell you about this weird Soviet cult. Yes, although I did start with children's cartoons, today's topic will not be fun at all. Meet Viktor Stalbun, a son of the Soviet neurophysiologist David Stalbun, a candidate of medical sciences who tragically died during a stratospheric test in 1938. Viktor clearly lacked his father's medical abilities, since he failed to graduate from the medical university. But he discovered another talent in himself, the talent to convince people of his own uniqueness. Thanks to this talent, in the 80s, Viktor Stalbun managed to create his own clinic, which cured willing patients of almost any disease, as well as a complementary organization to the clinic, whose stated goal was the formation of children of outstanding abilities. And the patients of this clinic were not ordinary people, but famous actors, writers and politicians. It was these people who gave their children to be educated in the Viktor Stalbun school. But we will discuss this school later. Let's take a look at his medical methods and their effectiveness first. So, our unsuccessful physician was expelled from the medical school in the 1960s, but nevertheless he did not give up hope to tie his life to medicine. He entered the part-time department of the Faculty of Philology and received a diploma in logic and psychology, after which he went to work in several psychiatric hospitals. Apparently, he was not satisfied with the methods he has witnessed there. So he took his psychiatrist wife Valentina Streltsova and began to develop his own methods of treatment, which he called by the collective word reflexotherapy. By the way, this technique was actually studied by the major Soviet scientists of the time, but their opinion was anonymous and disappointing. The technique did not work, the theoretical justification was untenable. By that time, however, Viktor did not expect to find his way into medical school textbooks as the author of a new method of treating illnesses. His plans were much more global. News about the innovative methods of treatment of all diseases and Stalbun's unique clinic were spreading all over the Soviet Union. Viktor Stalbun began organizing private sessions for recovery from alcoholism and schizophrenia. Among his patients were many representatives of the Soviet pop scene, movie and television stars, writers such as Roland Bykov, Yuri Entin, Vasily Livanov, Eduard Uspensky, Vladimir Shainsky, and also notable political figures such as aviation major general Alexander Tsalko or perestroika ideologue Alexander Yakovlev. Stalbun's patients were increasingly influential people, up to and including members of the Politburo itself and, most importantly, their children. And the list of organs and diseases that could be cured by his innovative methods was constantly expanding. If in the first years of his activity Stalbun treated only alcoholism and schizophrenia, then he began to treat asthma, cancer, and claimed to have an ability to awaken the genius in children. There is evidence of the use of two basic techniques in Stalbun's clinic: psychological, suppression, humiliation, merciless criticism, and physiological, Treatment of the Zakharyan head zones, areas of the skin usually examined when diagnosing diseases of internal organs. Stolbun's method, that very reflexotherapy, suggested that by inflicting pain on these areas one could also cure the diseased organs these areas were associated with. There are especially many accounts of the treatment of the buttocks and toes. Some patients were treated with controlled electric currents, some were sprayed with the ethyl chloride, a powerful cooling anesthetic. Stolbun believed that stimulation of these areas helped to reduce aggression and had a positive effect on the psyche as a whole. In the early 80s, Viktor Stolbun made a revolutionary statement. He came up with the concept of the therapeutic commune. For effective treatment of complex conditions, specialists and patients must not only work together, but also live together. He invited everyone who wished to cast off the shackles of society and purify themselves spiritually and physically, far from the cities in the countryside, in one big commune, led by him. Stolbun invited entire families, reasoning that treatment for mental illness is ineffective when done individually and that practically the whole world is sick and we should stay away from them. He suggested to the families who came to him that all the serious troubles they face come from the fact that they have mental problems. He inflated family conflicts by intelligently weaving in various medical terms, and people believed him. People realized that without Viktor Davidovich they would collapse, sink into the abyss of madness, and they became more and more dependent on him. How did Stolbun propose to cure people of this worldwide madness? It's simple: labor, humiliation and pain. And he understood perfectly well that adults would not allow themselves to be treated this way, so he put the main emphasis on children. He created a school in the Moscow region, Dmitrov Experimental Specialized Preventorium, where parents had to send their children for the development of physical and mental abilities. Some parents also visited the school, but most of them were treated only with electricity or ethyl chloride. All children, on the other hand, were convinced that they had some kind of mental illness, which will be cured by fresh air, hard work and the same reflexotherapy. At the same time, I must admit that the children in this experimental school of Stolbun were really taught according to an advanced program. The school had a choir, its own theater studio, but all this was just a cover, behind which Stolbun the spider was hiding, weaving his web. In the early 1980s he abruptly moved his entire school from Moscow region to Tajikistan and made the final decision to specialize in children. Only his most trusted adult associates were allowed to move with them. According to the accounts of the children who studied there, at first 20 people lived in a terribly cramped two-room apartment, practically never even going outdoors. And for all that, the fame of the unique boarding school continued to grow. After all, most parents were either fascinated by the brilliant doctor or trusted his reputation. And who would believe some children that in this unique school they were being punched in the faces for any misdeed, were being forced to work from dawn till dusk in the fields, especially since their relatives who were associated with Stolbun often participated in all this themselves. For example, the beating of children was called mechanotherapy in the cult, and it was up to child's relatives to carry it out. Stolbun considered himself above that, although he called the method a very useful thing for children. Allegedly, mechanotherapy, or to put it bluntly, punching kids in their faces, helps improve brain function. Stolbun set up a genuine 24-hour surveillance of the students and their relatives, as well as daily sessions of group humiliation and reprimand that lasted for hours. Stolbun would wake up the whole school at 3 AM, place them in line and began to scold one of them for the slightest fault, regardless of age, till the morning come. By the way, a similar method was very actively used by commanders in the Soviet and Russian armies. In fact, all this time Stolbun and his wife have been conducting psychological experiments on children who were unlucky enough to attend his school. All signs of a destructive organization were apparent. treatment for all diseases by weird methods, separation from the outside world, constant beatings, and the cult of personality. Needless to say, Stolbun and his loyal associates did not really work anywhere. They received all the money from grateful parents and members of the commune. Stolbun openly declared that he was raising a new type of people, more powerful, tough, and strong-willed. The children were indoctrinated that they were the chosen ones and that the other people around them did not deserve their attention. At the same time, children in the sect were taught to be deprived from an early age. They hitchhiked across the country with their parents or on luggage racks and trains, lived in crowded and unsanitary conditions of tent camps or small apartments, were forced to toil all day long in vegetable gardens. It's funny, but in this group there was a complete and even hypertrophied acceptance of Soviet ideology. The adult members wore badges with a portrait of Dzerzhinsky and opposed world Zionism, despite the fact that Stolbun himself was a Jew by birth. In their free time, kids learned and sang pioneer songs, read patriotic literature about the exploits in the name of the fatherland and the party, and were constantly snitching on each other. This was considered honorable in the group. The most interesting thing was that these children were not even hiding from anyone. On the contrary, they were engaged in public education and propaganda, traveling around the country with concerts and shows. The audience could see perfectly well that children on stage looked dirty and outright neglected, but they took it for granted. Stolbun had built himself a perfect shield from the authorities. In fact, up until the collapse of the USSR, the ideology of the group coincided with the official one. The ultimate goal was to build communism with better people. It was only in the late 80s that authorities finally decided to check Stolbun boarding schools on the fact of children being abused. But Viktor just changed the location of his commune once every 6 months and quietly continued his work. In the 90s, his cult experienced a real heyday. When the Soviet Union collapsed, they easily abandoned Soviet ideology and switched to orthodoxy. In 1994, Stolbun gave an extensive interview to Vladislav Listyev in his program Chas Pik, the most popular Russian TV show of those time. Money from influential sponsors poured in. Ads for his cult appeared on the front pages of national newspapers, and Stolbun recruited more and more followers. Well, he was not only recruiting, but he was creating also. As in any self-respecting cult, the leader had a harem of his closest associates. According to some estimates, about 10 wives who gave birth to more than 30 children. The children were considered common and were raised by the commune. They learned their father's name only after his death. And some children to this day still believe that their father's methodology was really working and unique, that only in such harsh Spartan conditions it is possible to bring up a worthy citizen of their country. It was not until 1996 that the Russian Ministry of Health issued an order banning Stolbun's methods in Russia. Although after that, in 2000, the Russian Ministry of Defense, on the advice of the same Alexander Tsalko, allocated an entire division of medical and psychological rehabilitation to Stolbun. He used it to continue his experiments on children with confirmed mental deviations. The Ministry of Health had no direct power over the hospitals of the Defense Ministry, and they could not do anything about it. Viktor Stolbun himself died in 2003, but according to journalist investigations, his case is still alive, and their commune still wanders from town to town. Many children who grew up in the cult in the 90s received their own medical degrees from some regional universities, and are now involved in psychological and medical practices. For example, according to some sources, Stolbun's followers now work in the Central Research Institute of Tuberculosis in Moscow, providing psychological rehabilitation for children and teenagers with pulmonary tuberculosis there. And also in several private clinics, where reporters during phone calls were promised to get rid of their insomnia with the help of technology of stimulating the skin areas associated with the nervous system. Sounds familiar, right? We can only hope that 20 years from now there will not be a lot of news stories about how the followers of this pseudo-doctor rehabilitated children all over the country with his favorite methods.